Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Pass Ball Show brought to you by johnpielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Lots of stuff we're going to get into today, and I do want to welcome everybody back. We got a little bit of a setup here. There's actually some things I'm going to be working on over the period of the next couple weeks and couple months. We're going to add a couch. We're going to, pretty much make this into, as good of a studio as we possibly can. Of course, the last show we did was on the 30th of June, and it was fun, but obviously it was the time of the page being turned as we set ourselves up, different type of setup, same content. So feel free, anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. And a big shout out to everybody that's listening to me for the first time. Please feel free to contribute, comment, let me know what's on your mind, let me know what you're thinking about. Even if what it is that I'm talking about is different than what you're thinking about and what you want to hear about, just let me know. But we'll be with you probably for the better part of the next half hour to an hour. We're going to talk about some stuff going on in baseball, and I do think it's important as we get close to the end of July. We bring up the casual stuff that gets brought up, the quote-unquote buyers and sellers, and also the dream trades where every team that has a chance to win feels like that they're going to be able to do. And they feel like the players that they want, they could be the best players in the world, but they could be able to get them at little to no cost. And it is kind of frustrating to me. I mean, you hear about the rumors regards to Manny Machado. And listen, I think the Orioles are in a different situation than a lot of teams that have control of a player. And you understand that Manny Machado is going to be a free agent at the end of the season. He's pretty much let the Baltimore Orioles know that there's no way that he's going to come back. So I think it's a little bit of a different scenario than, let's say, a Jacob deGrom, who I spoke about on the last show. Or you could talk about any really good player in the sport, and you could say, hey, there's a price for every single player. Well, the price for Manny Machado is probably not going to be the price for Jacob deGrom. And the price for Jacob deGrom would not be close to that of a Max Scherzer or a Mike Trout. And I'm going to talk to you about that over the next couple minutes. It seems like the Baltimore Orioles are pretty hung on acquiring left-hand pitcher Justice Sheffield from the New York Yankees, who obviously himself was acquired in the Andrew Miller trade and ends up coming over to the Yankees. He's done a good job in AA and AAA, and looks like he's almost Major League ready. So the Orioles feel if they could pry him as part of the Manny Machado trade, then they would make a deal with the New York Yankees. Obviously, most seasons, most players, the Orioles probably would not think about anything close to making a deal with the New York Yankees. They would say, hey, listen, we would not trade him in division, but if we were going to trade him in division, we'd trade him to Boston, we'd trade him to Toronto, we'd trade him to Tampa Bay before we traded him to the Yankees. So the Yankees have to think about this. And to me, I'm not a real big fan of getting Manny Machado at the end of July if you're the New York Yankees. Yankees are on their way to the playoffs. Sure, they're going to have to grind it out if they want a chance to win the American League East. But acquiring Manny Machado is not going to be the difference in the Yankees winning the American League East and having to play that play-in game in the first round of the playoffs against another wildcard team. They're going to need a top pitcher. And obviously a lot of the talk in regards to Machado has been, hey, the Yankees can make their offense better by getting Machado, probably for a rental, but with the understanding that if there's a team that he'd like to play for over the next series of years, it would be the New York Yankees. So the odds the Yankees have in re-signing him are probably better than the odds of him signing with any other team that he was ended up traded to, or the odds of any other team once he becomes a free agent at the end of the season. Now the thought is, you got a guy like Miguel Andujar, you do have some other prospects, and perhaps the Yankees could swing a deal for a top pitcher. Now, Jacob deGrom's name has been thrown out there, and I did mention this on my last show, and I'm going to reiterate my points. It wouldn't make any sense for the Mets to make a deal with the Yankees in regards to Jacob deGrom. I know Yankees fans feel that, hey, maybe the Yankees have some players that could be of interest to the New York Mets. But if I'm the New York Mets and I'm dealing with the Yankees in regards to a trade for Jacob deGrom, this isn't sticking it at the Yankees. This is just letting you know that the team values the player as much as they do. And if you value Jacob deGrom as much as you do, there's no reason that you wouldn't ask for Gleyber Torres to be part of that package. And it could be a very quick conversation, and you can expect it to be a very quick conversation. But that's the standards, and that's what you set for Jacob deGrom in regards to making a trade. And I know I mentioned a proposal a couple weeks ago when I did my last show on the 30th, starting with Andujar and Justice Sheffield and Clint Frazier. But I think it would take more than that. And if I'm the New York Mets, and I have a chance in a lifetime to make a deal involving Jacob deGrom, which, by the way, you don't have to do. You don't have to do it now. You don't have to do it by the end of the season. You don't have to do it by the trading deadline next year or at the end of next season. And who knows what will happen within a year. Maybe a year from now, we're laughing at the thought of trading Jacob deGrom a couple of years ago. But here's what bothers me. The Mets should absolutely put him up on a pedestal right now. Because if you go back in the history of the franchise of a lot of deals they made, and I understand the deals they made last year were nowhere near in comparison to big-time deals. They didn't have big-time players that they were looking to deal. So they weren't in position to get huge packages back. But this is the same team that traded Tom Seaver, 31 years ago. 41 years ago. And got back Doug Flynn, Steve Henderson, Dan Norman, and Pat Zachary. So at the time that deal was made, I don't think anybody was excited about Dan Norman. Nobody was going crazy about Doug Flynn and Pat Zachary. Nobody was excited that Steve Henderson was coming to the Mets because he was going to be the premier Mets outfielder for the next 10 years and an all-star. So you can't make a deal like that, especially at a time where you don't have to. Jacob deGrom has not asked for a trade. He is not demanding to get out. Listen, he may not be happy. He may be unhappy with the lack of run support he gets started and start out. He may be unhappy with the direction that the New York Mets team is going in. But he's not going to the media begging to be out. Now, maybe this is something that happens behind closed doors. Maybe he sets up a meeting with the Wilpons. Maybe he meets with John Ricco and J.P. Ricciardi and Omar Minaya and says, you know what, I really would prefer to get traded. But knowing Jacob deGrom, or at least the way he personifies himself, he's probably not going to be a person that's going to put demands on the Mets. I'm sure if he wanted to get traded, he would suggest, listen, if things work out and you can move me, I would prefer to go. But outside of that, I don't think Jacob deGrom's, knocking at the bit or chomping at the bit to get traded. So because of that, you have a little leverage. And if you're making a deal with the New York Yankees, listen, I told you about the Gleyber Torres tax, which I think is important. If the Yankees hang up the phone with you or say, listen, we're in no way, shape, or form looking to deal Torres, then you have to up the price a little bit. And you have to, for every reason, up the price. And the bottom line is you don't have to trade this player. And that's what fans, let's say, of a team that will be looking to acquire him should understand too. So when you're talking about your scraps, your extra players, the players that you can't use at the major league level, and maybe you throw in a guy that you think might be a little good, that's not going to work in a trade like this. And I kind of hinted at that last time I talked, and I think they're better off if you're the New York Mets not making a trade like this at all. So if I'm putting Jacob deGrom and I'm saying, listen, he is worth Gleyber Torres right now. He may not be in 2 years, and the Yankees don't have to make the trade. I ask you, what is the value of Mike Trout if a team was going to trade for him right now? Because I was thinking about this the other day, and I find it fascinating because you got a player who is the best player in baseball, hands down, has been the last 3, 4, 5 years. There's very little doubt in regards of who the best player in Major League Baseball is right now. We're all in fantasy baseball leagues, and every time, the person has the number 1 overall pick and a chance to take Mike Trout, they take Mike Trout. That's the player you want to start your team with. People have complained because he's playing for the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. And the Angels made the playoffs a couple of years ago. We're expecting to do some good things this year, and have kind of fallen off. They're in 4th place in the American League West. Shohei Ohtani was a big acquisition for them, a pitcher that could also hit. He's just hitting now. But the Angels are in a tough situation. They got to catch the Athletics before they catch the Astros, before they catch the Mariners in their own division. So if I was going to talk about the chances of the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim having a really good chance of getting to the postseason, I kind of take a step back and realize it's probably not that good right now. And I heard somebody, a writer that I respect very much, and I respect him enough that I don't want to throw his name out there. He's a guy I read a lot of his pieces. He suggested, is there a player in baseball that is a bigger waste at where he's at than Mike Trout? And I couldn't disagree with that point anymore. Reason being, Mike Trout can get you the core of your team, the young core of your team plus your prospects in a trade. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're completely asinine. Mike Trout right now, and has been for the last 3 years and probably will be for the next 2-3 years, is hands down the best player in Major League Baseball. Not only is he a very good hitter, but he hits for power. He hits for average. He gets on base. You know, he's up there in OPS plus, weighted runs created, WOBA, every single year. And he's the best player in baseball. And obviously doesn't play bad defense as well and runs pretty good. So you're going to tell me that the consensus best player in the game is not going to raid your roster in regards to a trade? You want to know the real reason that Mike Trout has not been traded from the Los Angeles Angels to Anaheim? Because they probably couldn't put a price that was high enough to get him. And I'll spill a little beans. This person that made this comment is a Dodgers writer. So I came up with a proposal. If you were interested in making a deal, you know, we got the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Los Angeles Dodgers obviously have been a good team the past 5 years, made it to the World Series last year, and are in pretty good shape. Obviously, they've suffered a lot of injuries this year. So they're in a spot where they're certainly going to be in the pennant race the rest of the season. And obviously, if they made a hypothetical trade for Mike Trout, that will make their team much better than it is right now. Here's the problem. Here's what it's going to cost you to get Mike Trout. And I'm saying the price is only going to be this low because Corey Seager is hurt right now. But you want to make a deal for Mike Trout if you're the Los Angeles Dodgers, start with Corey Seager. Throw in Cody Bellinger. Throw in Ross Stripling, Julio Urias, and your top two prospects, Alex Verdugo and Walker Buehler. You want to trade for the best player in baseball? Pay a price that is the equivalent of trading for the best player in baseball. And obviously, this is all hypothetical. This is something that's not going to happen. But if you're talking about the value of a particular player, and you're going to value Mike Trout that much above anybody else in Major League Baseball as the absolute best player by a mile, can do everything, then why am I not, if I'm the Angels, saying, listen, you can have Mike Trout, but it's going to cost you half of your roster and your farm system? People in baseball, unfortunately, we've been split into different categories. You got really good teams who are continuing to get richer, and you got lousy teams that are absolutely going out of their way to give away their best players and don't care what they get in return. And people are down on the Angels because they haven't been to the playoffs a lot. People are down on the Angels because they haven't made it to a World Series with the best player in all of Major League Baseball. It doesn't mean they don't deserve them. And if a team wants to go out there and pay the price of what it's going to cost for Mike Trout, if you're not a Dodgers fan, think about what players on your own roster would be the equivalent of Corey Seager, Cody Bellinger, Ross Stripling, Julio Urias, Walker Buehler, and Alex Verdugo. You're talking about your two top prospects, maybe your three top prospects, including Urias, a very solid pitcher, maybe not a star pitcher, but a good pitcher, and probably your two best offensive players. That gets you Mike Trout. So another silly one that I've heard out there over the last several weeks, you think about the Washington Nationals, they're having a little bit of a disappointing season. I get it. There's no doubt about it. They haven't played well. They're looking up at the Atlanta Braves and the Philadelphia Phillies, two of the bigger surprise teams in all of Major League Baseball. So I get it. You would think that maybe you get to a point of the season and you say that it's not the year for the Washington Nationals. The reason that it can't be, number one, is this has to be really the last run that the Nationals can make before they make a huge trade and transition into what they're going to be in 2019 and beyond. Bryce Harper's not coming back. Daniel Murphy, hey, they can sign him if they want. Gio Gonzalez, if they want to re-sign him, they probably can. But you know what? I would say the odds, at the very least, are 50-50. And Swedish Meatball says entire Mets team for Mike Trout. I don't think that would be enough. I got to be honest. I don't think the Mets have enough value on their team and their entire roster if they traded every single player that they had to the Los Angeles Angels and Anaheim for Mike Trout. I don't think it would be enough. They'd have to go into the ghosts of Christmas past. They'd have to trade you a vintage, 1989 Darryl Strawberry. But I think it's a silly spot because you're looking at the possibility of landing one of the bigger players in all of Major League Baseball. And I started talking about the Nationals for a second, and I wanted to bring up Max Scherzer. Not because I think there's any chance in hell that Max Scherzer gets traded. I don't think there's any way that the Washington Nationals would even entertain a deal involving Max Scherzer. But there are some mongos out there. There are some silly people out there. There's some people that are fans of whatever team it is that you're a fan of. And you are kind of looking at things in tunnel vision, just not thinking that the same rules that you'd apply to the rights of your own players on your own team should apply to the rights of players on any other team. In other words, Major League Baseball is one big group of free agents. You should be able to pick whatever player that you want, and you don't have to give up what the proper equivalent is in making that type of trade. So Max Scherzer. And I'll use the Yankees as an example because I picked on the Dodgers in the first one when I was talking about Mike Trout. What would it take to get the Washington Nationals to give up on Max Scherzer? To trade a player, which, by the way, they probably value Max Scherzer as much as the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim value Mike Trout. There's no question about it. I mean, if there is one player that exists on the roster of the Washington Nationals that they probably want to hold on to in thick or thin, even if this becomes a losing season and they end up with a losing record at the end of 2018, if things go to hell this season, the one player that they'd like to have back next year is Max Scherzer. And obviously he's signed under contract for another several years. He's got money coming to him at the end of his deal for the next, I think, 7 years after that. And odds are Max Scherzer would like to retire as a member of the Washington Nationals. So, feel free. We're taking offers. Any player in baseball can be had for a price. So if I'm the New York Yankees and I want to get Max Scherzer, I'm sure the Lerner family and Mike Rizzo will tell you, yeah, sure. Pretty similar to the way the Dodgers could have Mike Trout if they give up Seager and Bellinger and Stripling and Urias and Vertigo and Walker Buehler. How about we'll start the Scherzer package with 2 players? And any Yankee fan that's listening right now is going to get pissed off at me, and it's fine. If I'm the Nationals, I want Luis Severino and Aaron Judge. And you know what we'll throw in there as well? Miguel Andujar. And that actually might be a deal that I'd hate to say it because Yankee fans would not be happy with this. They don't want to give up on Aaron Judge. Rookie of the Year last year, could have very well been the most valuable player last year. But if you're looking at the Yankees and Giancarlo Stanton, Bryce Harper's a free agent, you want to sign him and put him in the outfield? You want to get Manny Machado to play third base? Think about it if you're the Washington Nationals. You get yourself an ace pitcher that you can pitch right there with Strasburg. You get yourself a starting third baseman. You take your third baseman and Anthony Rendon and move him to second base. And you just got Aaron Judge. to replace Bryce Harper. I mean, anybody that's not a New York Yankees fan may actually understand the logic to that. Listen, there's no way it would happen. It's a pipe dream. I understand it. It's not crazy to suggest, that something like that could be done. I mean, there's possibilities that could exist. But the long point, as I've taken my time to say, there's certain players that the value is just way too high to ever consider them being traded. And I think you're thinking about Jacob deGrom in the next 2 years that he has with the New York Mets. And you're kind of borderline. You're kind of right at the edge saying, well, there's really no sense of urgency to have to move him right now. So the Mets would be very silly to not ask for the most that you possibly could get. With the Yankees, it would be Gleyber Torres. Now, the Yankees can hang up with him, like I said. Pretty similar to a Scherzer. Hey, the Nationals will say, hey, you can have Scherzer, but we want Severino, we want Judge, and we want Miguel Andujar. And obviously, nobody's going to make that trade. But the bottom line is you talk about certain players, and we tend to live in this fantasy world. And I think a lot of the problem is that we play fantasy sports. So we flip top players for other top players all the time. And there's teams that are looking to get that, let's say, that sleeper player that they took in the 9th or 10th or 11th round of a draft, and they know that they could keep that player next year, and it's all right because their season's over, they could give away one of their top players. In real life, it doesn't always work that way. And if you're going to talk about guys like Mike Trout and Max Scherzer, and just say, hey, automatically they're going to be available, you can have them. The Nationals would be happy to make a trade for Tyler Wade and Tyler Austin and Austin Romine. That'd be good enough, right? You get Max Scherzer, wow, good deal for the Yankees. You gotta stop thinking like that. Nationals would never trade Max Scherzer, but if they did, you know what? I think you got a hard dose of reality. When you just said, what? We got to trade Judge? We got to trade Severino? Yeah, that's what it's going to cost to get you Max Scherzer. So you might as well just move on and think about another need or another player that you could get to help your team. You're the Dodgers. You want to trade for Mike Trout? Really? Do you still want to trade for Mike Trout when it costs you Corey Seager and Cody Bellinger and Julio Urias and Ross Stripling and Walker Buehler and Alex Vertigo? And I'm not even sure that that's enough. I'm serious. I don't think it's enough. Moving on. We got the World Cup going on. Obviously, congratulations to France and Croatia about to appear in the finals. France winning in 1998. Croatia has never won. And if you go back to the history of the World Cup, you have teams that are pretty prominent like Brazil, who's won it 5 times. Germany and Italy have won it 4 times. Argentina and Uruguay have won it twice. England has won it once. France winning it, like I said, in 1998. And Spain in 2010. I'm going to be honest. I don't know a ton about breaking down this game, so I'm not going to do it. But I look at the history of the World Cup. And you think of Germany winning it in 2014, Spain in 2010, Italy in 2006, Brazil in 2002, France in 98, Brazil in 94, West Germany in 1990, Argentina in 1986, Italy in 1982, Argentina again in 1978, West Germany in 1974, Brazil in 1970, England in 1966, Brazil in 1962 and 1958, West Germany again in 1954, Uruguay in 1950, Italy in 1938 and 1934. And the very first World Cup held in 1930 was won by Uruguay. And you know what? I bet you if you're not a diehard soccer fan, that was some information you didn't know. So hopefully it helps out. But once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. Of course, brought to you by johnpielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. We're going to be announcing a couple more sponsors that are going to be representing the show within the next couple weeks. If you look to what my right is, which I'm pointing over here, we're going to have a couch. So we're going to be able to bring in studio guests for part of the show. And obviously we're working on a lot of things in regards to technological advances we can make to make this show better to be viewed, more features, more things that you can see and do. And just make sure it's the best product that we can make to help grow in the near future. John Tavares signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And obviously, if you're a New York Islander fan, you're probably pretty upset over it. You've thought about a guy that has been your franchise over the past 9 years. He's led your team to a playoff berth, but obviously your expectations as a fan is you wanted to see more. You got one of the top players in the entire sport, and you like to win a Stanley Cup, kind of like the Alex Ovechkin situation with the Washington Capitals. He may have been the best player in the entire sport, but similar to Mike Trout, the criticism you could say of it against Alex Ovechkin is the fact that he was never part of a team that won the whole thing. And obviously that changed this year. Just like if Mike Trout went out there hypothetically in some strange reason and the Angels blew through the competition going back 1988, Major League One, type of way, with the pieces coming off the dress of the picture and you got to win 30 games in a row. If the Angels did it that way, then maybe they'd have a chance. But if Mike Trout somehow won a World Series, that'd be a big monkey off his back. The one criticism you could have about Mike Trout, he's probably going to go down, he's on pace to go down as maybe one of the top 10 offensive players in Major League Baseball history. And I use top 10 because I know some people are going to be like, he's top 5, top 3, top 1. I'll tell you, that top 10 is loaded with some of the best baseball players we've ever seen. And there are players that I think may be better than Mike Trout when it's all said and done that don't break the top 10. But we'll save that for another show. John Tavares goes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. The biggest comparison I can make with Tavares leaving was Zach Parise going back home to the Minnesota Wild. And he did it in a way where, listen, he wanted to stay in New Jersey up to a certain point, but in all reality was probably comfortable enough in his own skin to say, hey, I wanted to go home to Minnesota. John Tavares wanted to do the same thing, go back to Toronto. He probably should not have asked the Islanders not to trade him. He should have been traded if he knew that he wasn't going to come back to this particular team, allowing the New York Islanders to perhaps get something back for him. They may not get the next John Tavares back. They may very well, though, have gotten some pieces that they could use, and I think fans right now would feel a little bit better about John Tavares leaving and going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think of Darryl Strawberry, I got to be honest with you. Being a Mets fan, going back really till, I would say, a good part of the 1987 season, maybe the midway. I was 7, turning 8. I think I really started paying attention, started breaking down stats and stuff like that at that age. And Darryl Strawberry was probably one of the more dominant players in the sport at that point. Guy who came up, obviously, in 1983, was part of the Mets World Series championship in 1986. And as 1988 happens, and 1989 happens, and 1990 happens, you start thinking, wow, this guy's going to be a free agent. The Mets should sign him to an extension. And that didn't happen. And I tell you, when it comes down to the most heartbreaking sports move of a player leaving my team, I'd have to say it was Darryl Strawberry leaving for the Los Angeles Dodgers after the 1990 season. Now, number one, turned out to be a mistake for Darryl. Darryl admits all these years later that he never should have gone to LA. It was the worst thing that he could have done. His issues that he had off the field became more of an issue. Excuse me. So I tried to think, and maybe that's a question I could throw out there. I'll make it a Twitter poll question after the show today. I'll come up with 4 players or 5 players and, kind of throw a number of different teams in different sports and say, what was the biggest heartbreak of this player leaving? How about LeBron James leaving for the Miami Heat? I would think as we hit what's going to be probably the 3/4 point of the Passball Show, brought to you, of course, by JohnPielli.com. at St. Aloysius Church and School. I'm trying to think about some other players that ended up leaving 18 and going to sign somewhere else. I mean, the Seattle Mariners probably knew that once Alex Rodriguez became a free agent, that he was probably going to leave and go somewhere else. That the Seattle Mariners probably didn't have the wherewithal and the financial capacity to sign him to the contract that he was expecting. And obviously he got that deal from the Texas Rangers. So I don't think Seattle Mariner fans are heartbroken because Alex Rodriguez left. But I do remember Carlos Beltran after the 2004 postseason, where he did nothing but hit home runs for the Houston Astros. Almost led them to a World Series that they would get to a year later. And thought was, hey, the Astros spent in regards to players to get Carlos Beltran, so why not have this guy re-sign with you and be with the Astros for the next several years? And I remember when he signed with the Mets, I remember the Beltran sucks shirt with the dollar signs on both of the S's on the word sucks. That was obviously a heartbreaking move to a fan base when Carlos Beltran left. And where does John Tavares leaving the New York Islanders for the Toronto Maple Leafs rank in regards to moves like that? Like I said, I'll put a poll question up after the show today. I'll let you vote on it. I'll put Strawberry in there. I'll put LeBron James in there. I'll put Tavares in there. I'll make a couple other examples in regards to certain sports, because every sport can relate to having that player that is considered an icon of a certain franchise, and you never expect them to go and end up going where the money is or going where the best opportunity is. And as we hit the last segment of the show, which we call Nobody's Listening, we're going to remind you once again that this is the Past Ball Show. And Nobody's Listening is the time where we talk about something that is not related to the world of sports. As we're done talking about sports, and if you're a sports fan, you may want to take a walk away. You may want to back away a couple steps. You may want to maybe turn the program off, because we are now talking about something that is not related to sports. So what we're going to talk about today is an icon in the history of entertainment. We're maybe one of the pioneers that we consider when we think about the best entertainers. And if you're from a generation or two behind, this man passed away in 1974. He retired in 1971. So, you got to be watching television in the 1950s and a better part of the 1960s to know who Ed Sullivan was. And here's a guy that was a pioneer, and he was very good at what he did. And I think if he was around right now, the resources would exist to make this guy, I don't know, he would stand out a little more, or I believe a lot more would be asked out of him than is asked right now. And I think about it this way, because I think of Johnny Carson, who obviously had a tremendous career. Jay Leno has had a very good career. I think of David Letterman, and also contemporaries. I think the only one that really stands out in regards to his talent and kind of carrying that torch is Jimmy Fallon. Can't stand, the obsession that people in the public eye have with politics, but I'm not going to talk about politics. I promised you I'd never bring that up on the show. So Ed Sullivan, if he was around right now, he would have to be a little more opinionated. He would have to be a little more of a comedian. He would have to be a little bit more of his own entertainment. And if we understand what this guy did for a series of years, he was the best at booking guests. He booked the Beatles. He booked Elvis. If you had a name to yourself, or if you were on your way up in regards to anything, you wanted to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. But and as great of a guest booker, and I guess saying, hey, here is so-and-so, what else did he really bring to the table? Here's a guy that stood there, and I don't know if he had any sort of issues that kept him in regards to the way he was able to move, but he's the biggest stiff in the history of the world. He'd go out there, he'd have his little microphone, he said, hey, welcome to the Ed Sullivan Show, here's so-and-so. Here's so-and-so. Here's so-and-so. And during this time, you'd have great musical acts, you'd have great bands, you'd have comedians, you'd have all types of talented people that were on the biggest stage in the world, taking advantage of their opportunity to be seen by millions and millions of people. And Ed Sullivan brought that. So once again, it's stuff that I can't criticize. But in the day and age that we live in now, he would have to be providing a little more of the comedy. He'd have to be providing a little more of the talent. Because it's impossible for somebody to just stand up there right now and say, here's the show. Was there an easier job in the world? And now listen, I'm not taking anything away from what Ed Sullivan did in regards to booking guests. Obviously, you needed to establish yourself as something, which he did. You know, nobody's going to go on, you know, the John Pielli show unless anybody knows who John Pielli is. Same thing applies to Ed Sullivan. He wasn't just lucky. They weren't like, oh, you know what, I'll give this Ed Sullivan show a shot and we'll see how it works. This was a guy that obviously had the name to him. To be on the Ed Sullivan show was a big deal. And people knew that. That's why if you're a musical act and you wanted to be seen, you wanted to be on the Ed Sullivan show. If you're an upcoming comedian, you wanted to be on the Ed Sullivan show. But outside of his guest booking ability, my question is this: what did Ed Sullivan do to contribute to his show? He didn't provide any of the content. He didn't provide any comedic relief. And really, it wasn't until Johnny Carson got the ball rolling in the 1970s that the host had any personality at all in regards to late night TV. And Johnny Carson did it better. He did it where he asked questions, where he'd interact more with the guest. He wouldn't just stand in a little cubicle and wait for the next guest. He would ask them questions. He would bring out the best in some people. Ed Sullivan never did that. So he's going to go down, obviously, as a pioneer in history. And many people that are in the world of late night TV and comedy and entertainment can look at Ed Sullivan for what he accomplished. Starting in 1948, he did it all the way through 1971. But I can't get over the issue that I have with a person that either didn't have a personality at all or was just so ignorant to the fact that he needed to have a personality to run his show. And I understand if you're a viewer, you had nothing to compare it to. So it's not like you could turn on a competing network. You know, cable TV didn't exist there. I think in the 1940s and 1950s, there was 2 channels if you were lucky. So you had to watch Ed Sullivan. He was thrown right in your face. There was no competition. Ed Sullivan of the 50s and 60s was a freaking monopoly. You had no choice but to watch him. You had no choice but to want to be booked on his show. So I wonder if the guy took it for granted. I wonder if the guy said that, hey, I've built up the notoriety and people want to be on my show. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be a part of my show. I don't have to show any talent. I don't have to show any personality. All I do is just introduce guests. Because of that, does Johnny Carson become more innovative? Do we start to talk about the genius of Johnny Carson? Because he actually sat there behind the desk and asked his guests some questions? Listen, I understand if you grew up in that time in the 50s and the 60s and there was nothing else to watch or no other entertainment around you. I understand why you watched the Ed Sullivan show. But as I conclude the program today, I want to know what it is about Ed Sullivan himself that made you want to watch that show. Because it was all about the bands. It was all about the entertainment. It was all about the comedic acts. It was all about the talent that he was booking on that show. You watched the show because of that. You never turned it on because of Ed Sullivan. It could have been anybody hosting that show. You would have watched it because of the talent that was being booked there. A little recap of the show today. We talked about a couple obscure trading scenarios. If you want to trade for Mike Trout, well, be ready to pay a package that starts with Corey Seager and Cody Bellinger and Julio Urias and Ross Stripling and Alex Vertigo and Walker Buehler. You want to make a trade for Max Scherzer? How about parting with Luis Severino and Aaron Judge and Miguel Andujar? World Cup champions. France is looking to win the World Cup for the second time in the World Cup history. Croatia is looking to do it for the first time. I'm going to set out a poll question after the show. The biggest move of a player leaving a team that was the most heartbreaking for a fan base. I'll give you some choices. Ed Sullivan, biggest stiff of all time, in spite of all his great talents. I'll be back with you tomorrow. I hope everybody's enjoying the program. Please feel free, even afterwards, if you want to send some comments, anything on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. This is the Past Ball Show, brought to you by johnpielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.